This video is about truth and lies.
Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
It's about bias and non-biased information.
It was a deliberate act of sabotage, and now the Russians are pumping out disinformation and lies. We're going to work with our allies to get to the bottom of precisely what happened.
It's about analysis and balance.
We told you a few weeks ago that we have information indicating Russia also has already prepositioned a group of operatives to conduct a false flag operation in eastern Ukraine. So that, Matt, to your question, is an action that Russia has already taken.
It's an action that you say that they have taken, but you have shown no evidence to confirm that.
It's about what's right and what's wrong.
Russia launching a major missile attack in cities all across Ukraine, and now reports that a missile crossed into NATO territory, killing 2 people in Poland.
We start with breaking news. New evidence out of Poland tonight confirming a rocket responsible for a deadly attack there, killing 2 people, was not fired by Russia. The Polish president saying moments ago there is no sign it was intentional either. Rather, it's looking more likely that it was a Ukrainian air defence missile fending off incoming fire.
And it's about what is happening all around us.
Gunfire and explosions have been heard here and in the second city of Kharkiv shortly after the Russian President Vladimir Putin authorized a special military operation in Ukraine's Donbass region and told the Ukrainian military to lay down their weapons and go home.
Who is he now? After full-scale invasion, for me, he's nobody. Nobody.
Putin's actions are a sign he's struggling. He can't seize his neighbor's territory and get away with it.
The recent invasion of Ukraine by Russia has sparked a flurry of rhetoric from the Western world, with many leaders and media outlets invoking the terminology of World War II and the Cold War. The use of such terms serves to frame the conflict in historical and ideological terms, emphasising the importance of defending democracy and opposing aggression. One reason why the West has turned to these historical references is to lend moral clarity to the situation. By portraying Russia as an aggressor and Ukraine as the victim, leaders hope to rally public support for a forceful response. The use of terms like invasion and annexation emphasise the idea that Russia has violated international norms and territorial sovereignty, and that it is a clear-cut case of right versus wrong. Another reason for the use of World War II and Cold War terminology is to establish a sense of continuity with the past struggles against authoritarian regimes. Many Western leaders see the current situation as a new chapter in an ongoing battle for freedom and democracy, one that has its roots in the struggles for the 20th century. By invoking the memory of past conflicts, they hope to tap into the sense of national and cultural identity that will motivate people to take action. Furthermore, the use of these historical references is also a way of sending a message to Russia. By framing the conflict as a battle between democratic and authoritarian systems, Western leaders are making it clear that they see Russia as a threat to the global order. They are also signalling that they are willing to take strong action to defend their interests and those of their allies.
You know, 1 year later, Kyiv stands, and Ukraine stands, democracy stands. The Americans stand with you, and the world stands with you.
To be specific, the White House, Congress, and the press insist that Ukraine is an innocent victim of an unprovoked aggression, and that Russian forces will threaten all of Europe if they are not stopped, and that the United States must stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes to assure victory. It is nearly impossible to deviate from the prevailing viewpoint. Even in the lead up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, a small number of voices called for caution and restraint. But in the current Ukraine war, it is even more difficult to find dissenting voices. Presently, suggesting that all parties involved in the Ukraine conflict share some responsibility, or questioning the United States' decision to provide advanced weaponry to a volatile conflict zone, or even examine the importance of the outcome of this conflict is deemed heretical or even treacherous. The intellectual discourse surrounding Ukraine has been stifled by strict enforcements of a no-fly zone, leaving little room for reason or discussion. Within the corridors of political power in Washington, Ukraine has taken on an almost mythical significance. It is no longer just a physical location, but rather a cosmic battleground where a pivotal struggle for the fate of humanity is playing out. The conflict is viewed as an opportunity for the United States to assert its dominance over Russia and demonstrate that despite the shifting global power dynamics, it remains in firm control. There is a sense of pride and anticipation amongst some that the war will offer a chance to defeat Russia in a decisive manner. Let's analyse this. How are governments and mainstream media spinning their narratives in order to swing the support from the masses? And more importantly, how is the stifling agreement that binds our political parties and media preventing thoughtful debate? Before we kick off, I want to make something clear. This video is not biased towards Russia or any authoritarian regime. Furthermore, no one is undermining the bravery and the tragic losses of Ukrainians who are fighting against the Russian advance. What I do have a problem with is the centralised authorities that claim to be trustworthy and transparent, but instead actually deceive the public and shape opinions to gain support for these authorities' decisions, of which serve the interests of a very selected few. And these interests, as many of you know, come at the cost of others. My name is Zero Fox, and on this channel we look to break down the biased narratives spun by government and mainstream media, and instead provide you with transparency and truth. If this is your first time on this channel, I welcome you. Let's begin. The rise of President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine to popularity in the West was fueled by a compelling media campaign that portrayed him as a champion of freedom on a global scale. His image quickly became ubiquitous, appearing overnight in shop windows, news outlets, and on various online platforms. On the other end of the spectrum is President Vladimir Putin of Russia, depicted as representing all things depraved and loathsome. He satisfies our desire to channel animosity not towards nation, ideology, or movement, which may be too amorphous, but towards a specific person. For decades, we have relished in our perceived moral superiority over flamboyant antagonists such as Castro, Gaddafi, and Saddam Hussein. Putin fits seamlessly into this group. Ultimately, having such a comically villainous foe is almost as comforting as having the virtuous Zelensky as a friend. Last year, when war erupted, Congress approved a $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. Noteworthy was the unanimous support of every Democratic member of Congress, as well as the opposition of only 11 Republican senators and 57 House members. The media commended this decision, and 1 year since the invasion, federal records show Congress approved more than $113 billion in aid in the last year. These funds have primarily been appropriated to the Department of Defense, the State Department, and USAID. Countries engaged in war, whether directly or indirectly, typically do not promote discussion about the merit of the conflict. The United States is not exempt from this trend, as demonstrated by the historical actions of Presidents Abraham Lincoln and Woodrow Wilson, who imprisoned war critics. Additionally, certain individuals who opposed the Vietnam War faced prosecution. Presently, the lack of discourse regarding America's involvement with Ukraine represents another successful instance of the government's manipulation of the official narrative. Even on social media, creators run the risk of censorship or demonetization if their content is assessed as misinformation or politically unacceptable. Moreover, both governments and private institutions may carry out censorship under the basis of national security or to restrict political or religious opinion. Arguably, the most potent storyline in modern history, the Cold War propagated the notion that Americans face an imminent threat from an enemy capable of attacking at any moment, rendering the United States powerless and obliterating any prospect of fulfilling an existence on Earth. This adversary was situated in Moscow, and Americans were convinced to hold this belief for years. Furthermore, during the Cold War, Russia had already become familiar to Americans as the embodiment of a savage force that perpetually menaces civilization. As early as 1873, an American cartoonist portrayed Russia as a shaggy beast competing against a handsome Uncle Sam for global dominance. This stereotype endures through generations. Like many societies, Americans are readily galvanized to detest any country that is targeted for hatred. In the case of Russia, our collective perceptions have been primed for generations, and on this point I want to be clear. The West is not alone regarding many of these points. This perception management is conducted by governments worldwide. And to consider countries such as the United States, the UK, and even Australia having monopoly over these practices would be incredibly narrow-minded. In regards to the Ukraine invasion, the majority of reporting from the battlefield originates from our side, portraying an insistent stream of accounts regarding Russian atrocities and other despicable acts. While these reports may be truthful, the one-sided nature of coverage creates an impression that the Ukrainian army is incapable of committing war crimes. Amnesty International's report highlighting the use of human shields by Ukraine forces was met with anger and consensus. The underlying message is apparent. One side is righteous, and consequently reporting from the battlefield must mirror this view. This all supports the manipulation of truth and transparency, and furthermore sets conditions for the masses to continue support to foreign policy that may not be in the best interest for peace and prosperity. Numerous writers and journalists discussing the conflict appear to share the same belief as their Cold War predecessors, and that is that the United States government functions as a team and the press must play its part in securing victory for this team. The fact of the matter is this perspective is detrimental to journalism. The press should remain neutral and not aligned with any particular group. Its primary responsibility is to scrutinise official accounts rather than blindly promoting them. This is what distinguishes journalism from public relations. Moreover, what has been made very clear is any journalist asking questions of verifiable intelligence based on information given by the White House spokesperson is labelled as a conspiracy theorist or a Russian sympathiser. Any good journalist backs up their story with facts and data, and to release a story based off hearsay and circumstantial evidence is substandard reporting. The nature of this publicity can be devastating and long-reaching. The expectations as a war correspondent is to report from multiple angles, and it is particularly notable to observe the one-sided nature of the reporting surrounding Ukraine. The lessons many war correspondents took away from unbiased reporting is that no single party holds a monopoly on virtue in times of conflict. However, the collective Wests are being presented with a simplistic narrative that portrays all virtue on one side and all evil on the other, which lacks nuance and complexity. Mainstream media have shown reluctance to cover the Ukraine war objectively. Many major news outlets have failed to ask crucial questions regarding the conflict. Let's be clear with the questions not being asked or addressed. Should Putin's reluctance to have enemy bases on its border be considered justified? Is it justifiable to cause the death of thousands in pursuit of a political objective? Did our actions contribute to the escalation of the conflict? To what extent does Ukraine's military comprise of pro-Nazi elements? Before providing extensive aid, should we take into account Ukraine's reputation as one of the world's most corrupt nations? Finally, is this conflict truly a colossal struggle between democracy and autocracy? As the United States simply becomes increasingly involved in the Ukraine war, certain questions are considered impolite and therefore avoided. The current stifling consensus among our political parties and media inhibits meaningful debate. The good news is that people around the world are beginning to wake up to this facade. More and more people are pushing back against the policy and actions the collective West are taking against Russia. Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist Seymour Hersh's latest release on the US contribution on the sabotage of the Nord Stream Pipeline 2 has raised more questions and has shed light on the bias within the Western media. And better yet, we are beginning to see a greater number of independent reporters and analysts surface who aim to release balanced and responsible information to the public. And the greatest thing about many of these sources is they advocate for you to conduct your own research and are teaching the basic skill sets on how to vet information and draw conclusions. Some of these independent outlets include Scott Ritter, The Duran, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, The Dive, The New Atlas, and even Russell Brand. The lies offered by our media on the Russian-Ukraine conflict are baffling in that many of the West simply accept them without question. The fact of the matter is that mainstream media should be ignored as propaganda, pure and simple. Instead, it is essential to protect and support these independent sources who aim to displace truth and transparency with global events. In conclusion, the true victims here are the Ukrainian people, who are stuck in the middle of a war in which the intensity is only forecasted to increase in the spring. And while the strategic interests of both the collective West and Russia are pursued, only more violence is expected in war with no end in sight. Well, that wraps up the video. I hope you learnt something, and I implore you to seek out some of these independent journalists and media outlets. If you enjoyed the content, perhaps think about subscribing and sharing with your friends. I would also love to hear from you. Are you tired of mainstream media narratives serving both government and institutional interests? And finally, I'd love to know where you get your information from. Like always, stay safe, stay informed. This is Zero Fox, out.